Ich habe angst. I have fear. I started thinking about this address after an event in November of last year. St. John's had been invited to be part of a symposium on art and architecture. And there was a symposium at the Wallace Collection, at which there were a number of speakers and a number of different works of art were shown. One of them was entitled Ich habe Angst, I have fear, by a German artist called Rosemary Trockel. At the time, I thought it would make an excellent Good Friday reflection. That was before any of us had even heard of COVID-19, and coronaviruses were not high on our list of things that worried us or made us fearful. In the light of the last few months, Ich habe Angst, I have fear, seems even yet more appropriate, and especially as a focus on Good Friday. It struck me reading through the Passion narratives in each of the four Gospels that throughout all of them, one consistent theme in all of them is that of fear. Fear is a recurrent theme for each of the participants and the protagonists within each of the Gospel readings seems to have fear at the very centre of their actions. Fear determines what they do, and fear is responsible for the consequences. Pilate himself might not be thought of as the most obvious person in the story to be fearful. But Pilate, despite it all, is quite clearly terrified. For a Roman governor to have a complete insurrection and mob rising on his watch was simply not acceptable. He had to weigh up the political situation on the ground with what he was required to do. Instructions from Rome were always to govern the province well, to send back the taxes, and not to lose control. The events of Holy Week come very quickly, seemingly out of nowhere. And Pilate, like everyone else, is caught up in this maelstrom. He needs to act decisively and quickly. At the heart of what Pilate needs to do is to keep the peace. He is fearful, as rulers have been from time immemorial, of the mob. He is fearful of a large-scale insurrection. He is fearful for himself, for those under his command, and for the rest of the province. looking at Pilate's actions as ones which are determined and led by fear, puts yet another spin on what he feels. Pilate might well have said, "Ich habe angst," I have fear. The disciples too seem to be channeled by fear. Jesus has repeatedly told them what is to happen and what they can expect. None of them, I think, quite understood what was going to happen in the way that it did. From the meeting breaking up in the upper room, through the Garden of Gethsemane, and on, they too must have been caught up in the moment of not knowing, of fear, and of worry. Peter is perhaps the best example of this. When in the courtyard he denies Christ 3 times, as was predicted. His motivation was not principally to deny Jesus, rather than to keep himself safe. Peter might say, "Ich habe angst," I have fear. There's also the problem of Judas, one of those others caught up, doing possibly what he was instructed, but not being aware quite of the consequences of his actions. He too might say, "Ich habe angst," I have fear. The Sanhedrin and the leaders of Jerusalem, the high priest and the priests, they want to stay on the good side of Pilate. They don't want to rock the boat. They want life to continue much as it was. They don't want somebody coming in and challenging the authority of Rome. They want to maintain their position. They, like Pilate, want to ensure the ongoing safety of those for whom they may be responsible. They don't want a mob insurrection. It's not in their interests. It's not in the interests of Jerusalem. They too might say, "Ich habe angst," I have fear. In this week's Church Times, there's a useful piece by Angela Tilby, who spoke at St. John's last year, considering the difference between fear and anxiety, of those who are fearful and those who are anxious. Interestingly, she notes, a reasonable proportion of those who suffer from anxiety are not feeling that during COVID. Their anxiety has been replaced not by an unfounded fear, but by a genuine fear. Somehow, she notes, they mark the difference. A genuine fear and an ungrounded fear lead the body to very different responses. Many of us may be feeling sensations of fear and anxiety. Like the disciples later in the story, we are gathering behind closed doors. A number of us in upper rooms, hiding not for fear of the Jews, or of the Romans, or of any particular group of people. Instead, for fear of a virus. A very real fear for many. A fear for ourselves, our families, and our friends. For those who will not survive this particular infestation. In those circumstances, we might well say, ich habe angst, I have fear. Death is one of those things which, if at all possible these days, we like to brush under the carpet. It happens, but we don't talk about it. It's not something we prefer to think about. But the message of Good Friday is that there is, and there always has been, and there always will be, death. It's part of us being human. Each of us, no matter whether we're a road sweeper or a prime minister, will eventually end in the tomb. The tomb is at the heart of the liturgy today, of death and of dying and of seemingly no hope. And in those circumstances, we may well say, ich habe angst, I have fear. For the message of Good Friday is grim and is stark. For those caught up in that first Good Friday, these were real life events, one coming on top of the other in quick succession. Each of the blows seemingly worse than the first. But then they only knew the fear. They knew not the end of the story. They had heard, they had listened, but not understood. For they were filled with fear. We might ask ourselves, what fears do we need to bury? what might this Good Friday we want to put into the tomb.